Hmm. Intentions have an interesting quality to them. Despite what you do to cover the intentions with, what camouflage you apply, what Photoshop skills you apply, what tweaking and manicuring and doctoring you do, whether it's a graphic representation of what it is you want to convey, or usually in the form of words, sentences, statements, sound bites. Words that have nothing to do in depicting your intention, basically they are a cover-up of what you really intend to do. Despite all those skills that you apply, intentions have a weird way of exposing themselves, and that is through action. In the end, what happens with those words vis-a-vis your action, manifested conduct? It could be a person, it could be an organization, it could be a company, it could be basically an ephemeral or even an intangible entity, a thing, like a corporation, for example, even though it's, in America at least, they turned that into a person. The corporation is regarded in the law as an individual. So what we're talking about are words. Words that have nothing to do with really doing their job, meaning to capture the essence, at least attempt to capture the essence of what it is, the main intention or intentions of the individuals speaking them, the words, statements. So we've been drifting further and further and further away from really embodying what it is that we want to do, want to say, want to feel even. So in a conversation you have with someone, you really have to spend some time to peel away, to scrape off a lot of junk, a lot of captured non-native lingo, terms, expressions, which do not belong to the reality, having anything to do with the very experiential reality, existential reality of the person speaking them. And this is one of the dangers of modern technology. It's the easiest thing to have heard something online or on the news or something, watched it, heard it, or in a podcast or something like that, and then without absorbing it, simply because you go by the feeling that this thing generated in you. And that's where the devious, terribly devious power of the usage of, unwise usage of words comes in. What I'm trying to say is, when the person is listening to something and it makes them feel a certain way, they take that as truth. Why? Because it made them feel a certain way. This is dangerous. This is not good at all. Because the person first having been lazy, not exerted oneself to really probe to hear what is this person trying to say. For example, a person might tell you, you're the smartest person ever. Okay? Well, you need to have more data. Professor Mehrabian, I think it was, from UCLA in the 80s, had done a study on communication and what is it that we were communicating, the medium, the methods, the tools, the instruments, and what is being communicated, understood. He saw that only 7%, about 7% was the actual verbal communication, words, etc. The remaining 93% was purely nonverbal. Now, when you have a culture that's mostly using the method of texting or reading statements, sound bites, few word sentences, whether it's on, I don't know, social media, I think it's called X now, used to be Twitter, and things like that. They just see one thing and all of a sudden it generates a feeling in them, and they go ahead and blurt out, they go ahead and hurl the vomit of thoughts of whatever was going on in them already, as well as the narrative that was happening around the people with whom they associate. So the people you hang out with, the influences that you expose yourself to, very much has a lot to do, if not all, with the way you think, even when you're by yourself. This is dangerous, especially when we remember the Buddha saying, it is all about the company you keep. You want to know what the secret to great fortune is? Good luck, basically, in today's lingo. What constitutes great fortune or blessing? To identify and to know and to discern between a wise person and a stupid person, a shallow, empty person. So what you have today are a lot of people who are shallow, stupid, empty, hollow. But the language that they're using is borrowed language. The sound bites, the words, the statements. And this is reflected throughout the various different strata of society today. Educational institutions, universities, etc., where knowledge is supposed to be, in a sense, created. I remember one of my PhD advisors years ago, he said, because I used to go back and forth with him, and I would really have to pull my hair, basically, because it was frustrating. Because every time I would submit, for the candidacy and all that, the proposals would get denied. I had to restart my whole doctoral program, basically, I think 3 times. So the dissertation itself took more than 15 years. And I had a professor who had taken 10 years to complete, but when I was doing mine, I was thinking, wow, I'll never let it get to that that point, So anyhow, he would tell me, forget about the methods that you use to do your bachelor's, basically the undergrad. And the first college I had gone to, I had to submit a thesis for that to get my bachelor's. Not all universities do that. Most of them don't do that nowadays. And then I had to do one for my master's. So he would tell me, you have to think differently when it comes to the PhD, the doctoral program. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I have to think differently. I know how to do research. I know how to do this. He's like, no, you have to leave the master's, the bachelor's methods of doing things out. Because you will have to create knowledge. You have to add, basically, to the intellectual, I guess, inventory of humanity. You could say that. He didn't say that. He said you have to create knowledge. And that stuck with me. And this was, I don't know, 29 years ago? Maybe less. But today we don't have that. People are not being encouraged to think for themselves, to say words that come from themselves. So you have organizations with lofty terms, lofty, slogans. You have countries, entire countries based on some lofty terms. Slogans, and they've had that, after the French Revolution, the French Republic, they talked about, to this day you see it, fraternité, fraternity, liberté, liberty, that kind of, I forgot the other one, égalité, I think, equality. This is not a criticism or a critique of the French system, of course. You see it everywhere. Companies. World Economic Forum has lovely, flowery language in their statements about the environment, about humanity, and this and that. And then you look into what it is that they are discussing every time they hang out, especially in the course of time. You go to the conclusions or summaries. What was the theme? And you see, they're talking about reduction of population, of human beings. Climate change, okay? Human beings reduction, what does that mean? Killing of human beings. Stopping of the reproduction of the human species. Climate change, while each of them, actually all these people have flown in to Davos and other places like that with their private jets. CO2 emissions, right? Now, if you and I or anyone wants to travel, you now have to pay for that carbon footprint thing that they came up with. So, but when you look, it's so impressive. The titles, this and that, beautiful language. Where is the intention? Hidden behind words that are absolutely hollow, completely. So what it is that we need to do, we always have to look at the action behind those statements. Another thing that they came up with is this term, which I've mentioned this before, strategic communication. See, this is like those Russian dolls, one hidden inside the other, inside the other, inside the other, and then finally you open one, there's nothing. Empty, hollow. But it looks impressive. It looks promising. I mentioned how when I first encountered this was about 3 years ago? 3 years ago, I think. And I was in Asia, and someone was going to travel to Japan to do their undergrad. They were going to go and live there, and so they were excited. And I said, so what were you studying? What is your major? And they said strategic communication. I said, I'm sorry, excuse my ignorance on the subject because I don't know what that is. Could you tell me? And they said, oh, it's. She gave the example of speaking untruth, false truth, I'm sorry. It's about, like when you're in the media and, it's about false truths and this and that. And I said, wait a minute. What do you mean false truth? You lost me there. What is that? Because I've never come across false truth anywhere I've studied. I've read books and gone to countless lectures and seminars and what is this? And they said, well, in the media, for example, if you're going to be a reporter, you get something and it's like a false truth. So you have to, I said, well, I don't understand. You mean lies? She said, yeah, but we don't use that term now anymore. And that was like reaffirming the madness we're in. So what you do is, when you use a lot of these terms that most of them basically came out of the womb of postmodernist thinking, the philosophical schools of in Europe, early 19th century and even early 20th century, where it became excusable to have bad intentions, so long as you present it in a beautiful way, digestible way. They're all lies. And what's the measure? What's the litmus test to allow us to see it as a lie? The action of the person, the action of the country, the action of the politician, the action of the religious person. But this is so difficult for us to break away from. I often have been asked, in connection to this, about a certain image that a Buddhist monk has. Where is that image? Is it in the Buddhist monk, or is it in the collective narrative of the people? How they look at a Buddhist monk, their inner image or representation or presentation or, hermeneutic of that entity we call a Buddhist monk. But when you dig deep, scratch the surface, what we're looking at is basically how this term, even Buddhist monk, really makes us feel. So we have certain anticipation, we have a certain expectation towards this person. It could be a politician, it could be another religious character, it could be anything that you want to make a quick judgment about and walk away from that, or get on with your life. But you've established yourself some parameters. Labeling is what I'm talking about here also, which has nothing to do often with the reality of the thing in question or the person in question, as in the example I gave about a Buddhist monk. For example, many people think that a Buddhist monk is supposed to be extremely, almost like sedated or, quiet. Whatever you say, they have to be cheerful, they have to be okay, and they never say anything that could offend anyone. Well, what they're talking about is postmodernist thinking. To this day, when you ask a person about an action that was committed and they're there to make a statement about it, this was either black or white. This was a terrible thing or a good thing. So sometimes it's very, very clear. But people beat around the bush, walking on eggshells, to not say what really is happening. So this again takes us back to the emperor's new clothes scenario. Everyone sees what's going on. The emperor is naked, except for that child who doesn't care about these norms that society has come up with to mangle reality. They won't be able to, of course, because reality is looking at them straight. And the child, or a person who is still connected to reality experientially, can utter the right words to depict the experience proper. So people beat around, like, did this person do this? Yeah. But when the person is not in the room anymore, they go ahead and talk behind them. Yeah, that person should have done this, or that person did this, or this and that. Okay, when you put them next to each other, they're shaking hands as if nothing happened. Well, that creates cognitive dissonance in the person watching this, observing this. That's why I remember students in junior high when I was a teacher, and I don't know if it was President Clinton or someone like that, and they had kept on lying through their teeth. And everyone saw that. But no one was doing anything about it. And the child, the junior high student, you won't call him a child, some of them came up and they said, well, what about lies? Because, the president can lie. So what's the big deal about, me lying? So there's a new standard. So now we accept being in a carnival, in a sense. That's what society has become. That's what we want to, where we want to stay. Wearing masks. And the cell phone is a perfect example. Social media is an example. Everybody's on, I guess, Facebook or some other new platform they have, with tons and tons of friends, supposed friends, or some other, social media place where they can post pictures or videos, impress listeners, watchers, podcasts. But when you go ahead and look carefully, there's nothing. The person is depressed, the person is in a mess. But the way they presented themselves is incredible, So this is the danger. How long do you want to stay in this perpetual carnival that humanity has turned into? Because of our adherence to words and statements, lifeless words. Success, love even, the words. Where is it in regards to the actionable version or aspects of these? Friendship, what is friendship? It means truthfulness has to be there, honesty has to be there, dedication has to be there, confronting the person has to be there, risking the friendship for the sake of something better, meaning if one person is doing something terrible, a true friend will come up and say, excuse me, this was unacceptable. Tell me about this. Like, why did you do this? Why are you saying this? Why do you behave this way here when you're with me? When you're over there, you behave differently. I don't know which one are you? Wishy-washy is what postmodernism created. And unfortunately, this is reflected from the universities, the educational system in the world, not just in the US or in Canada. In the world is infiltrated with this poison these days. It will take a while for us to clean up this mess. And for that, children, we have to start young, again, to clean up the confusion in children's minds. And reconnect them with life, with play, with acting, the little things that I remember as children, acting like the children would act as if they're in a kitchen with these tiny little plastic cups and things. That's, pretend life, that's called child's play. But we've carried that into the adult world, and it's become the adult play. Strategic communication. What is that? But that is what we have today in the world around you. People are shocked when you give them a dose of reality. Why? Because it gets them close to life. This is crucial to understand. The facade of words, when the intention is incoherent, the intentions and the words have to be coherent. That's why the teachings of the Buddha, and in any religious or system of thought where something is being said, but the intention is clearly carried through and through the words, so it's clearly communicated. It does not distance the person from the experience. It is an attempt. The usage of words is basically to get you closer to the reality of what is happening or what's being referred to here. You see in parts of Spain and France, in those caves that are over 56,000 years old, I think, where you have palm prints and paintings, beautiful paintings of ancient man and hunters going after, let's say, buffalo and other animals. It's so authentic. It's captured beautifully. There's no pretending. That was their mythology in a sense, but mythology not in the way that we understand today. When we say it's a myth, that means it's a lie. It's made up stuff. In those days it wasn't, and Joseph Campbell was a big proponent of clearing this misconception about mythology, because words can never be as depictive, as descriptive, to capture the meaning of something as images are. Or can. That's why when you have somebody running for office, they go ahead and post their pictures everywhere. In the old days, I remember people would post the pictures of this person, the candidate, whoever wants to be elected, everywhere on the street, everywhere, billboards. When I was in India, I saw that too. Still carried on in other places. Images, 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 and sound bites like, you have this now in the social media scene in the world. But people want to go with the quick soundbite. Why? Because they don't want to take the journey to understand what's really happening, to ask questions. This is key. Something as ludicrous as strategic communication, nonsense, which has to be completely eliminated in my mind because it deprives you of life. It deprives you of truth. It's nonsense. It's poison. It's poisoning the mind of society, the children. Because when you accept that to be a proper discipline, it's ruined. Our ancestry, our history as a species is done, is gone. That's where we're headed if this nonsense continues. This whole wokeism is about that, to cut you off from reality of what is truly happening. That's why the person is like a zombie. They're seeing reality happening in front of them and they're in denial. They use some other person's soundbite and they look for similar ideas to be expressed. But what is the life telling you? Existentially, they are dead. They don't know courage. Courage requires you to take drastic action to reconnect with life, not to be in love with flowery language or terms or concepts that have no meaning ultimately on the ground. Okay, as far as your life is concerned. Disconnected from life. Same thing happened in Los Angeles recently with the fires that destroyed, terrible event, destroyed over 10,000 homes 10,000 at least. Like, that should be so shocking for people to really reevaluate the way they have been interpreting life. So words are only as useful as they bring you closer to reality of experience. When they are distancing you from reality, from experience, then we're in trouble. And that's where we are. Scenario number 2, that's where we are as a human species. So, but it's an individual work. Individual action that needs to be taken by each person. So collectivism can be good in certain environments, certain contexts, but in this case, the way it's been unfolding, it's terrible. Collectivistic thinking is terrible here, because it's like somebody coming into the village, a village that was prosperous, that was fine, it's self-sustaining, but they have a one source for their water. And that person, entity comes and poisons the water. There's so many allegorical, stories and parables on this, and from different cultures, interestingly enough. They come in and poison the well, which the villagers use to drink and all, sustain themselves. And now whoever drinks from it, that means everyone, goes insane. Meaning they lose their capacity to have common sense. And that's where we are, because we've been worshipping words, not looking at actions, not looking at reality of life. For that, you need to have other empty, hollow vessels that ricochet back the same nonsense, and you feel like you're actually saying something, meanwhile you're not saying anything. And this is how the future of humanity is going down the tubes, unless people regain their integrity by choosing, by putting the effort to choose and not go by what they're reading, being influenced with their emotions. Instead, to think about this, to use reason. Higher educational institutions are there to help you to enhance, deepen your reasoning capabilities. Okay? When they don't serve that purpose, they're obsolete. They're useless. But the dangerous part is they have been infusing more of that poison into society. They are the wells of society, the watering hole, the water well from which society at large sustains and nourishes itself. So when the institutions of education, higher learning, all the way from the, early childhood education, all the way up to the, higher education, postdocs, etc., universities. When you attack that, when you put the poison of stupidity, this vulgar ways of thinking that postmodernist thinking brought, to deprive a person from their right to think, the adventure of thinking rationally, using reasoning, common sense, when that is being pushed out for the sake of stupid, vulgar, terrible, immoral behavior that has some flowery language that goes along with it so that we feel fuzzy about things, it teaches us irresponsibility, and we sacrifice our humanity and the legacy of our ancestors as a species. Then you won't know what's what. When you say truth, you're not talking about truth. It's whatever is in fashion now. So now you have to sacrifice, because you have to go with your emotions, because your friends will not like you if you say this. So you have to say words, you have to give up your integrity, you have to give up who you are and what your beliefs are about this. Your conclusions about life have to be sacrificed. Why? Because you want to feel accepted. You don't want to be, at the very least, shunned by these societies that you like to be part of. These organizations, these memberships will be revoked. We saw this in the COVID time. So many doctors saw what was happening. It didn't make sense. Any scientific basis wasn't there with all these stupid mandates. But everyone was doing. People were dying because they were taking the vaccines. So many people were having blood clots. But doctors were refusing to write letters to give exemption to certain individuals who were prone to having blood clots. And majority of the cases were coming in with, hearts exploding and, pericardium and cardiasis. I think that's what the term was. And people were refusing. And people were dying. Everyone was annexing. The same thing today. People put pressure on you if you do not behave in a certain way that makes them feel cozy. They want to feel that. The rose-colored, years ago, it's funny because years ago I used to think, and in my talks I would always use the term Disney-esque. Disney-esque. Well, what is that? It's a fictional world. It's a world for an infant to believe in, happily ever after, and then, Cinderella, this and that. But that's where we are now. We have been. Fortunately, there are some people who are, they've been awake, but it's a small, small minority. But it shouldn't stay as a minority, because we have to call out a nonsensical, agenda-filled scenarios that are being thrown at us. So look at the language being used. I remember in the 90s, all of a sudden, based on what politics, world, situations were going on, suddenly on the news, I was a layman then, the term rebels turned into insurgents. I had to look it up. Meanwhile, the person was, or the group of people in this particular country, being referred to, let's say, were revolting against, were unhappy about these foreign forces that were occupying the land, their country, where they were there for thousands of years. So these people were unhappy, so they were fighting to kick them out of their country. Traditionally, if not always, such individuals, those locals, those natives of that particular culture and country and language, etc., would be termed as rebels. They're rebelling. It's called a revolution or rebellion. Suddenly, based on the scenario, based on the political agendas of the bigger, powerful occupiers, forums, it was presented as insurgents. And nobody questioned this. But I like to observe, and I observe patterns also. So for a few decades now, I've been noticing, and I'm not the only one, fortunately, thankfully, to see this. When you use the words to trim out what you're really doing, and you push that out there for the world, media, news, movies, even animation for children, you normalize things. You even normalize stupidity. And that's what we have. That's why I refer to the term zombie. I never thought in my lifetime I would see living, breathing zombies who don't question. But you have them in the billions now. The majority are them. Individuals who don't think. And these are people you know. I know. They're around. And the way to identify them is when you are presenting life in a clear-cut way. Reasonable, rational way. Giving them the context of what it is you're referring to. Giving facts. They're the first ones to leave the room. It could be figurative room or it could be real life room. Because you made them uncomfortable. Because you are putting a crack into the whole fictional world that they've agreed to dwell in. Why? Because it makes them feel good, because the majority of everyone in the world is subscribing to such idiocy. And the same thing applies now to the Buddhist monk I was referring to, the image of a Buddhist monk. No. This is terrible because one of the reasons why I do what I do with the sutta translations, the discourses of the Buddha, is to reintroduce to people, to make it accessible, in a language they understand, in a contextual, relational way, to explain to them, to share how a Buddhist monk is more than that. He's a human being. You don't just expect and add more things upon this person because they fit a certain look. Because your parents have said something about Buddhist monks or what you've heard about them being as. Kalama Sutta is, people go crazy, whoever studied a little bit of Buddhism. But they never actually look at it in the context of their own lives, what that means. The empirical approach, the practical approach of looking at a teacher. Not because they are well-spoken, not because they are everywhere, not because they are a celebrity, not because they are hobnobbing, rubbing elbows with powerful people and whatnot. You have to spend some time with them. You have to look at what they are doing. Action. Again, the intention is key. However, the intention can be hidden behind some interestingly placed, strategically, placed words. The only way you could see through them is you give it some time and you look at the action of the individual. I recently translated a sutta where the Buddha is inviting the Sangha, the Bhikkhus, the community of Bhikkhus, monks. It's a beautiful part of a monastic life where we invite the other person who was there with us, seen us through different lights, different situations. We invite them to come and correct us. It's beautiful because the Buddha himself is inviting the monks who had spent the Vassa or the rains retreat, which is about 3 months, and that act itself, the invitation. It's not an act, basically. I'm just using that word, but it's not fake. It's real. It's not like pretending. It's not a formality or ceremonial ritual thing, which unfortunately it has turned into in many places. But a genuine way to invite the person to scrutinize us, despite the hierarchy in this case, the Buddha being the teacher and the students being the students. And he says, I invite you, monks, if you saw any type of behavior, whether it was connected with my communication, with my speech, or my physical behavior, my action, how I carried myself, where I looked, this and that, And the monks say, Bhante, we didn't see anything. He gave them that platform to come out, not to shoot him down or anything. It has to be like, what a humble gesture. It's fact. Today we don't do that. But that is an objective of every single person, not just in context of Buddhist monks and the laity, which should happen also. If you're supporting a monk, if you're supporting a community, you need to know. It's like checks and balances. I'm sorry, the conduct has to carry over. The behavior tells us everything, not the words. But it's also in relation to our own lives. Let's say in the case of householders, lay people living in society, making a living, having relationships, having friendships and spouses and things. You need to have open dialogue. You cannot hide your intention or do something opposite to your intention. That's even worse. So there needs to be open dialogue, and there needs to be the invitation to have the other person know that you're giving them the opportunity to come forward without any retribution, without any punishment, from your part, because, you said this, or, I'm going to get you. No, you keep your verbal daggers out of this. You don't start loading up the gun because you heard them say some things and now it's your turn to unleash hell on them. No, you're genuinely listening in order to correct your behavior. And this does not need many words. This needs action. And action brings us closer and closer to reality, honesty. And that is in a bundle, like what spiritual life is all about, the way I understand it. Because it's all about authentic living and understanding and deepening your understanding. Not to complicate things and to dislocate you, to distance you from reality, what words have turned into. To isolate you from reality. That's not the purpose of us being here.